Daniel Keys, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we met once, I don't know how many years ago. Has to have been like a decade. How old are you now?
Oh, so you are going to start
Yeah,
with
hard hitting, man. Hard hitting.
Yeah, no, I'm 37.
Yeah, I think you were like 29.
Was,
You were 29. I remember you telling me you were 29 or something. So it would have been 8 years ago.
well, that's what I tell everybody even now. That's not, who knows? That doesn't
So it was last
indicate
year.
how old I was. Yeah. No, I don't think it was, I don't think it was a decade ago, was it?
I don't know. That's what I thought you said. I could be wrong. Yeah, you came down to Utah and then we went to the Springville
Yeah.
Museum. And I just remember you were you were quite young. I feel like you were in your 20s, but I could be wrong. But it was a good visit nonetheless. But it's great to see you again. I'm grateful you're doing the podcast. I'm excited to pick your brain.
Sure.
So tell me,
where did that name come from? I'm curious. What's
the Undraped Artist?
Artist?
Yeah, how did I come up with that name? Well, obviously it's a play on words, undraped model. And my goal is to reach deep into your soul and get out all your deepest, darkest secrets, get you naked on the podcast, metaphorically
it's pretty
speaking.
empty out there.
Yeah. That's my goal. So hopefully it'll happen. So for starters, I know a little bit about your history. I think, although I did think you were from Santa Fe, turns out from California. So I guess I'm off there. But so why don't you tell me a little bit about where you came from, how you got into art, your background?
Well, those are the things I feel like, God, aren't people tired of hearing that
No,
story?
just keep it
Although
short and then we'll get to the good stuff.
well, I was going to say they clearly aren't because nobody ever gets the information right. So it's like with the magazine articles, all of them. I mean, however many of them are out there, everybody clearly just looks at the pictures,
Yeah.
And, because everybody thinks they're like, oh, so you live in Vermont. How long have you lived there? I've never lived there, or Montana or wherever. So I was born and raised in Fresno, California. I still live in Fresno, California. That's the only place the only county I've ever lived in. And I don't know, I started drawing just like any other little kid, pretty young, in church. And eventually dabbled with paints. The story goes, I was 11 when I got my first paint set.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of all I've ever done. I'm considered self-taught because I never took any workshops or went to university or anything like that, or an art school. And eventually, kind of my big break was I got into a magazine, just sort of randomly. They had found my work online, and then they did an article and put the work on the cover of that issue. Not because of a contest or anything like that, just purely based on the work. And I had been, painting night and day for a few years using Richard Schmid's book, Alla Prima.
Okay.
Somewhere between there. I think that was, I was hitting that kind of study pretty hard for about 3 years, between 20 and 23, I would say. And so that when I was 23, that's when the magazine saw my work. And that was really the big break. After that, everything else came after that, including meeting Richard and eventually painting with him.
No kidding. So your connections, I didn't get it at all. I was under the impression that you studied with Richard at a younger age than that, but you really learned from him through the book Alla Prima. That was your introduction to him. Okay.
By the time we met, he had I don't want to say he knew who I was, in that I mean, he didn't know anything about me, but he had heard of me.
Right, right.
So it wasn't, by then I had already been studying his book like for about 3 years, I guess. And we met at an event where they were using, actually, it was an event put on by that magazine, and they were using my work on all of their um, posters and brochures and catalogs and all of that kind of thing. So everybody had some image of my painting at this huge conference. The Weekend with Masters. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, of course, I'm familiar with that. What magazine? It was Fine Art Connoisseur?
No, it was the American Artist, which is no longer in print.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm curious. See, I also bought that book when it came out. I was a little further in my career. I'm older than you are. And so it wasn't good for me because it sent me kind of spiraling in the wrong direction. You know, I'd already kind
Really?
of, yeah, it's a great book. Don't get me wrong. He's
Sure.
one of the greatest who ever lived, but um, his approach to painting is so different than mine. And yet he was so dogmatic in the book. I kept second guessing everything I had done before. So
Hmm.
it was difficult for me. So I had to put it away. But that said, tell me how, when you say you studied it for 3 years, what does that look like? I don't think I've ever been into a book or, any kind of instructional video or text or any kind for 3 years. Tell me how you went about doing that study.
Oh, I guess that sounds a lot more special, maybe, or intelligent of an approach than it was. It's that was all I had, other than magazines. I didn't have any other art books, and I had never seen an art video or DVD. I don't know if there were any like downloads at that point. So all I had was the internet, and I had seen Richard's work in a magazine about 5 years prior when I was about 15.
Okay.
And that just kind of stuck with me. So anytime there was a magazine, I guess if I stumbled on his work, I'd always kind of save it. And then I saved up the money and bought this book. So that
Hmm.
was basically all I had. So as far as study, I did like everybody else. I just looked at the pictures. And then once in a while, if I was struggling with something, I would maybe go back and read or see what he said on something. It's interesting that you used the word dogmatic, because I find that across the board, most artists, particularly those who teach, are pretty dogmatic in general.
Yeah.
And by comparison to those that I have since interacted with, I found Richard to be less so than others. Um, but I mean, I won't. I'm not going to start dropping names
Oh
and all
no,
that.
there's
But
very
yeah,
dogmatic teachers out there. I'm
there's
not going to
yeah,
disagree with you.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess good for you for just sort of saying no, that's not what I'm after, even though despite its popularity and everyone's kind of high praise of it. Because that's kind of hard to do. I think everyone is, especially at that age that I was, really susceptible to the dogma of whoever you kind of stumble upon. You're almost subject to whoever you find,
Right.
because
Right.
you're gonna think they're right. They're the ones that are right.
No, he's definitely not. And first of all, to be clear to the audience, that's not a critique of him either. But I will
Oh,
say
sure. Yeah,
he's hardly the most dogmatic person or artist I've come across.
yeah.
But you know what it comes down to is I would have loved to have become Richard Schmid. The problem is it didn't align with my temperament. And I realized
Mm,
that early on. So I would have had to force myself to become a totally different personality in order to be able to channel Richard Schmid. That's really what it comes down to. It's if I could be Richard Schmid, I would kill to be Richard Schmid, but it just wasn't in me. So I had to go a different
mm,
direction. Um, but and that brings up a question about you. Clearly, I mean, you're your own person. You're not Richard Schmid. You've got your own work. It's very much Daniel Keyes. but there is influence there. I don't think you would deny
Of
that.
course.
Um,
No.
so tell me about your temperament. I mean, did you feel like it was an easy slide right into that way of thinking, or was there any resistance that you know, hit as you were trying to learn how to paint like him?
Well, it's when you're that age, this is the issue I have with people who are of college age going to college and going to art school. When you're that age, I don't care how mature you are, you're impressionable, and you're going to take whatever your instructor says as truth.
Right.
And so, you know, you're going to be told you're a free thinker. You're not a free thinker at all. You don't know enough to be a free thinker.
Yeah.
You're someone's clay, and they're molding you, and that's just how it goes, you know. So I would say I was no exception to that. At that age, I was definitely just going to accept anything and everything that that book said. And then later on in life, while painting with him, you know, everything he said was right and true. When it came to art,
Right.
we disagreed on lots of other things. But um, I would say that along with that, it was fortunate that that's who I stumbled upon. Of all the artists whose work I would see, which I guess wasn't a lot because I wasn't exposed to a lot. His was always what I was most drawn to. His paintings. I don't know what you mean by temperament in the sense of, you mean his actual personality or the approach that
No.
that painting requires?
Okay. For example, um, you know, I know an artist and I absolutely admire this artist, but because it may come off insulting, it's not meant to. I'm not going to mention the name. I know this artist I absolutely admire is a filthy artist. Like, and they'll like you know how when the paint starts to get dry and goopy and
Oh,
it's like
sure,
skin over the top and whatnot. He'll just scoop up paint that's got half skin on it and half globs of dried clumps, and he'll put that into the brushstroke and he'll just leave it because he doesn't care, right?
sure,
And
sure.
then, but somehow when the painting is done, even though it's this kind of messy, goopy, globby, you know, pile of paint, it's so unbelievably beautiful, right? And
Hmm.
to me, that's a temperament because he's able to not even so much able, but his temperament allows a certain level of filth and chaos. Whereas there
Oh,
are other artists that are hyper controlled and every stroke has to be perfect, right? That would be the two
okay.
extremes. And the person
Uh-huh.
who's, you know, this particular artist, if you move a painting from against the wall, a rat will run out from behind it.
Oh,
Whereas
okay.
the tight artist might be constantly cleaning and during his breaks, you know. So
Sure.
that kind of temperament, you know, those personality traits go into the painting process, I think.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, no, I think that yeah, that does make sense. Um, I guess for that season of my life, I don't know if my temperament matched his, just sort of you know, fortunately, you know, maybe it did. Um, or if I was just impressionable enough that I would have adopted whatever was being presented to me.
Yeah.
So I know
Okay.
that since then, um, at that time, I would have just agreed with his philosophies of painting, his approach, and try to imitate it in order to learn from it. And since then, and I would have been more dogmatic, probably more dogmatic than he was, because I believed, you know, this approach, and I believed this philosophy and all of that. So I would have been more dogmatic, sort of in a secondary way. And then as I've matured, I've kind of branched out, and I I take a different approach. I don't. Yeah, I definitely have been heavily influenced by him, and it shows in my work. But even some of the approach, as far as how I lay the paint down, is entirely different. And then I'm much, I don't know, I guess I have a broader eye than I did before, and I accept all kinds of methods of painting and appreciate all kinds of methods. And so,
Okay.
but it seems like that's appropriate. I mean, it seems like that's the way it's supposed to go. You're supposed to absorb as much, if you have that kind of an opportunity, whether it's a book or an actual physical person, just absorb as much as you can, and then hopefully rebel a little bit, or experiment a little bit, and try to broaden your horizons and come up with your own way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the difference between you and many students might be, well, let me just compare to myself. I went to a state school, University of Utah, and I was given only 5 options for teachers, and a lot of times less than that, because it was whatever class was available, and it was usually the worst teacher that was available. So whereas you chose your teacher in a way, even though technically you didn't work with him personally. So maybe your tastes and your temperament sort of led you to the person who you would be most apt to emulate.
Sure.
Because I remember when I first started painting and had this teacher, he told me things like, put a brush stroke down and never touch it again, or this is a dogmatic part, or you're not a good painter.
Yeah.
And that was in my head for like 8 years.
That's where, oh man, I guess that's such a good thing to talk about, because I've taught a lot of workshops, and so much of it is unteaching people, getting people to unlearn, and not because what they're doing is wrong, but because they think that's the only way to do something. Well, this is what I was told, that this is how you do it. Well, why? That's not being a free thinker, and this is true of all of society. You've just adopted, or you've accepted as true, what someone has said. You're not actually processing it yourself and coming up with that as an answer. You're not arriving at that conclusion. You've just adopted someone else's conclusion, and you assume it's right. And I run into that a lot with workshops, and that's one thing that I guess it was a mixture of both. As far as when I eventually did paint with Richard, it was definitely a mixture, because that was the latter part of his life, and so earlier days he would have been much harsher and more dogmatic. I've talked to artists who they painted with him maybe in the 80s or something, and it was a different experience for them.
Really?
He was much softer. He was much more. He was more diplomatic in some respects. He was more outspoken in other respects. And so I don't know. It was kind of a combination of, he was very clear in what he thought was right in his approach, but he made room for other approaches. And then his whole thing was about, there are no rules, so how could I possibly tell someone else, don't do it that way? It doesn't make sense. I mean, he would say things like that. So it didn't feel dogmatic, because he allowed for at least this kind of pragmatic approach, or intelligent way of analyzing it. Like, how can I tell you what's wrong? There is no book that says you can't hold the brush this way, or you can't apply the paint that way. That doesn't even make any sense. So it didn't feel so rigid, at least at the time that I worked with him.
I'm going to have to read that book again, because what might have happened is my respect for him might have created this feeling that everything was rigid, because if he said it, it's true, it's fact. So it may not be so much that his statements were that. I'll have to look back into it. It's been decades since I've even looked at the book, but I'd be curious now if he actually was dogmatic, or if I brought that to the table and was like, no, it's Richard Schmid. Everything he says has to be exactly right. Who knows? I'll have to check in.
I think that's what happens. I mean, at that time, in those early years, I probably would have thought that, but I would have accepted the dogma.
Right, right.
You know, in my head, it probably would, you know, sure, it would be dogma at that season of your life because you're used to getting everyone's opinion and everyone telling you what to do. And
Right.
so I would have accepted it. But looking back on it now, I don't think I would see it that way at all, whether I accepted it or not.
Yeah.
I don't think I see it that way because his whole thing, and even in the book, he's constantly talking about how there are no rules, you
I
know?
totally misread it. That's
Yeah.
funny. You brought up some really good points. I'm going to definitely, right after this podcast, I'm going to go back and read it because I bet I'm
Maybe
way
I
off
need to
base.
read it. Maybe it's nothing but rules, and I've totally missed it.
No, I suspect you're more familiar with it than I am.
Not as much as people think. I've probably read it through like one time.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe not then. Who knows? Well,
Yeah,
okay. So later you really became a mature artist and you found yourself, so to speak, and added your
I
own
hope so. Maybe
approaches.
a little.
So tell me a little bit about that. How did you see that evolution take place? Was it an intentional thing where it's like, oh, I need to try something new, or did it
Mhm.
happen sort of one accident after another?
No, it's very much like I mean I relate it to just natural growing up. It's exactly what kids do. You go through those stages where everything, you know, your parents are, they know everything. They're so smart, and you just sort of mimic them, and you want to grow up and be them, you know. And then you reach those years where you don't want to be like them. You want to do everything the opposite of what they would do, and try to find yourself and figure things out for yourself. And I think I did that for a while, and it was very difficult to do because you at the same time have this extremely high esteem for what someone else is creating, and so um, you know you have accepted the supposed dogma, and like this is the way to do it, so it's very difficult to just come up with a new way kind of willy-nilly. So I would try in whatever way I could to, if you know, he painted light backgrounds, I started painting dark backgrounds, you know, something just to do something that would be different on purpose, trying to break myself of just the mimicry. And so what really helped was starting to pay more attention to whatever I was drawn to or attracted to in real life. You know, of course, I wanted to paint still lifes and flowers, and I want to paint all things, but mostly those things. And so instead of looking for something that looked like it could belong in a Richard Schmid painting, I tried to just pay attention to what I liked and what I was,
Okay.
you know, attracted to. And when I would do that, I would learn. I would, if I would paint it, if I would respond to that thing that I was responding to by painting it, I would end up kind of, I don't know, creating something that seemed like it was my own. And
Hmm.
the more I did that, the better I felt about kind of exploring. It's funny we're talking about this because I feel like this is where I am right now again, where I've just done these large still lifes that will be in the pre-West, and so they are kind of harkening back to that you know what I like to paint, and very much influenced by you know what I've learned from Richard. But I look at these again and I think, oh, okay, we need to rebel a little more.
Really?
And oh yeah,
So
yeah.
tell me more about that. What is it that you see in them, that you feel comfortable? Obviously, you don't want to just pick your work apart in public, but but what maybe you could tell me, abstractly what it is that you think you want to or what direction you want to move.
Well, it is abstract. I don't know. That's the
Okay.
thing. If I were clear about it, I would do it.
Yeah,
It's
isn't that
more
how
of
it
a
goes?
sense. Yeah, it's more of a sense of like, okay, this is I don't have any doubt that people look at this and they I mean if they've kind of followed representational art for a while, they're going to probably know that it's mine. I'm assuming, but there's I don't know. I don't know if I should be content when I look at this. This is not a Richard Schmid, but this is clearly someone who admires Richard Schmid, and that's a really good thing. And I've learned a lot. I feel like there's enough of it that's me, but maybe there could be more. It just I don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
It's
Well, I'm
still an
excited to see what you do.
abstract thought. Well, for a while there, I started a few years ago to paint these mostly roses with kind of like sunset light behind them, and that's kind of a whole series of paintings I've been doing the last few years, and that was really exciting because that to me was nothing like. I mean, I don't know that you could look at those and see a link to necessarily Richard or other artists that I've been inspired by.
So I'm here on your Instagram account. I wonder, here we go. Like this?
Any of those.
Yeah.
Any of those, even the ones you scrolled by.
Okay. Yeah. So okay. So about this subject matter thing, how the subject matter was sort of the leader of your evolution. Would you say that by choosing a unique subject matter, it kind of released you from the temptation to look at how Richard Schmid would have painted that thing? And so you kind of had to bring yourself into it and say, oh, well, this is something where I can't just refer to one of his paintings. Now I've got to solve this problem myself. I mean, maybe I'm not saying that was even conscious, but was that part of the process maybe?
That is I'd say, maybe even universally, anyone who's trying to I hate to say the cliche, words, find yourself, but anyone who's really trying to settle on who they think they are or want to be, I think that's part of it. Do some of your own problem solving. You're not going to be a free thinker without having to solve some of your own problems, figure something out. And don't go make problems and solve them, but at least just take whatever is currently in front of you and try to figure it out for yourself. And so if I chose something that I was innately attracted to, but I had not seen painted, even if I tried to imagine how someone else would paint it, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because people do that all the time. Like, how would Sargent paint this, or what would Zorn's approach be? You're still going to probably end up with something that's you, because you're assuming a lot,
right?
So you're going based on what you think, and it's still how you think they would have painted. There's still a lot of you in it.
I totally agree.
So I think that would be a great approach. And you don't have to paint something unique in that it's something that's never been painted before. I don't know if there is such a thing. It's just, for me, I felt it if it was something that I was somehow drawn to, if it could be a person or a thing or a place, then that's very much you. You're responding to yourself. So instead of looking at something, I just remember going through like antique stores or vintage stores, even with other friends, and you'd see something that you saw in a painting that you really liked. You know what I mean? You'd see something similar to, oh yeah, that, it looked very much, you can imagine it painted when you looked at it, because you've already seen that in a painting, or you've seen it done well in a painting and you really liked it. And so if that's all I ever chose, I would never really break away. You know what I mean?
Oh, I totally know what you mean.
And it's scary at first. You're like, when you don't feel confident in your skill set and you see something that, oh, you're really attracted to it, but you've not seen it painted before. So it's difficult to imagine it as a painting. It's a scary thing. And so if you'll do it anyway, and just kind of, you'll overcome that fear, you'll realize there's more than what you previously knew, and you'll probably find some bit of yourself that you can show to the world, at least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, speaking of subject matter, you said earlier that, I think you said you're interested in flowers and still life. I remember when you came to my studio that you were very adamant that you are not just a still life painter. You said, no, I paint
Sure.
everything, you know? And then,
Sure.
and then a couple years later, you went to the Portrait Society and you totally took home the Draper Prize with a portrait. And I was like, boom, high
Sorry.
five. And I'm just going to show the viewers the one that you won the Draper Prize with, and just was like, bam, I'm a portrait painter too. Yeah. And congrats to you for that.
Well, thank you. It's a total accident.
That you won that, or that you painted that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well,
No. I wanted to paint it. I had that idea in my head for a long time. And again, that idea would have been in my head for years. And I just waited until I felt I had the right level of skill, I guess.
yeah.
But I painted that because I wanted to, and for myself. And I was having a one-man exhibition. I had no intention of putting that into Portrait Society. And I was going to present that year, give like a demonstration and stuff. I had agreed to do that. And so I thought, oh, the deadline is midnight tonight. I should probably enter something, just to
Yeah.
It was like a courtesy thing. Like I should try to support this, and get involved and all of that. And so I tried entering portraits. I thought it's portrait. So I had like some head studies that I had done, and I had one that I really liked and some other ones. I thought these will be great. So I went through, you know how it is, it's online, you're entering, you put in all your information, and I don't know, you pay the fee, whatever it is, it would reject it.
What? Why?
Like it wasn't going through. I assume because it was so close to the deadline, there was probably 5,000 other people.
Oh, dude, that's divine intervention right there.
So wouldn't accept it, tried again, wouldn't accept it. I thought, let me try a different image. It would, because it would not load. It wouldn't fully load the image or something.
What?
And so
that is crazy.
This is not a joke. I'm not making this up. I thought, okay, let me try this one, and it was that painting. And then it went through. I'm like, oh man,
what?
Because I thought those aren't portraits. I mean, that's not a portrait.
They're getting looser and looser all the time on that, though, big time. Which I think is a good thing.
Well, I do too, but I feel like this was one of the ones that they really made it clear how loose they were willing to get. You know what I mean? Because up until then, every winner I had seen, because I mostly only saw the winners. It wasn't like I was involved in the Portrait Society, so I hardly saw anything about it. And so I would just once in a while, it'd come up in a post online or something, and you'd see this person won this. I didn't even know what the Portrait Society was until a few years before that. And so they were very much portrait, like standard, seemed very traditional or whatever. And so then I got a call from Michael Shane Neal, however many weeks later. I was in my car, and I thought, oh, that's funny that he's calling. And he said, hey, you've been accepted as a finalist. And I said, why? What are you talking about? This, are you sure? Like, that doesn't even make sense. This is not a portrait.
You're like, did one of the other ones actually make it through?
No, and none of them did. Yeah, but yeah. So it's totally accidental.
Yeah, and every year is amazing. A bunch of my students are going this year, and I think you're on the staff this year too, right?
Yeah.
Or faculty, whatever they call it. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to seeing you there, by the way. But
Good.
like 9 of my students are going, and I told them they're all excited about going to museums and the portrait gallery. And you may disagree with this, but honestly, my highlight when I go to the DC, between the portrait gallery, with some exceptions, is really not the portrait gallery. It's the 20 winners. Like that is some of the
Sure.
best work you're ever going to see in one
Sure.
place. So to win the Draper Prize, in my opinion, is a huge compliment because, man, all 20 of those pieces were stellar.
I thank you. It's still, if I replay it in my head, I think, oh, they really, um, I don't know, like they
No,
really
you
missed
deserved
them.
it.
What the heck,
You deserved it.
I don't know. I really thank you. I appreciate that. It's still kind of a, I don't know. It's a funny, a funny. I'm very grateful, that it happened. I'm, I sort of was like, oh, okay, well, this is good, and this was fun, and then I went back to still life.
You're like, shoot, I proved to Jeff Hine and back in Salt Lake that I'm a portrait painter.
Yeah, that's totally, yeah, absolutely.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the year Tim Reese painted his wife and pregnant wife and kids too, right? Or was that a different
No,
year?
no, that was the following year, and actually, we had talked about it, how, and I'm not saying that he credits me completely, but that he and others had paid attention to just how, okay, it's becoming less about just this singular portrait and more about a story and sort of a, something that people can insert themselves into. I think if you have a traditional commissioned portrait, it better be really unbelievably good, uh, because in itself, it might not get the attention that you think it's worthy of,
Right.
because people have a hard time inserting themselves into that kind of a painting unless it's of them. They have a difficult time, and so with this particular painting, I think what it was, and I had one of the judges come up to me, and she said it was unanimous because it's a panel of people.
No kidding.
It's not a single judge.
No kidding.
And she said there was no question. It was unanimous. I said, you're kidding. Like, I was just totally flabbergasted. I mean, the night that I won, I actually did a podcast with my friend about the whole thing, and it's kind of comical to listen to because it almost made me sick to my stomach to sit there at the dinner, and they're going through all of these names, and
I
you're
know. I've
so
been there.
yeah, your name is going to be called at some point, and you just think at any moment it's going to be called, and it keeps. You don't hear your name, and you're.
And
It's
then
a
they hear
funny
the J
system.
name, and you're just like, oh, that one was a J. I'm
Yeah,
next. I'm next. And then they don't
exactly.
say it, and you're like, whoa.
Well, but I wasn't like, wow. It was almost. I got sicker and sicker to my stomach. I thought I was gonna have to excuse myself, and go to the bathroom because I thought this. I did not care at all about, and people might not believe this, but I did not think I would win. I didn't care about winning. I thought, just get this over with. This is torture. I hate this.
Yeah.
And so I thought, just call my name already so that this can be over and we forget it. I don't want to do this again. And then I thought there were still more names to be called. I wasn't counting in my head. You kind of know, but I was confused because there was fifth place and fourth and third, and then there's a first place and a first place this and a first place that. So I'm like, I'm confused. I'm not hearing straight, because my mind
It is confusing.
yeah. And then it was David and Shayna were sitting at a table, and they kept turning around, and Shayna's like, she's pointing. It's you. I said, no,
That's
no.
David
There's
Casson and Shayna Levinson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. So they, Shayna especially, she was pointing, and I said, no, no, there's more names. She's like, there's no more names, you know. And yeah,
That's gold.
they called it. But anyway, I was about to say that the reason I think you're going to see, or we're seeing more and more of this, or whatever you want to call it. And so many people came up to me during that conference, and all they would talk about, of course, you know, they were saying complimentary words, but they kept saying how it reminded them of their childhood or their children or
Yeah.
their grandchildren. And you looked at the person and you think, well, if your children or grandchildren look anything like you, like they're related to you, how could this remind, you know, these are clearly, um, you know, white, redhead, blonde children. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so, because it's not a portrait, because it's more going on, people just were able to insert themselves into the painting, and I think that they could respond to it.
I agree.
And it's difficult to do that if it's just a stiff kind of portrait. Not to criticize portraiture, obviously. I mean, I like portraiture.
Yeah,
but
man, watch it.
I just think in general, yeah. I just think in general it's difficult for, I mean, Richard, getting back to him, had stacks and stacks of portraits in his, I used to go through his studio and just kind of by myself peel the canvases apart that were stuck face to face together of all his portraits. Amazing, unbelievable portraits. Unbelievable. I mean, people would lose their minds because they're all just kind of sticking together, you know.
Oh gosh.
The reason why is because they wouldn't sell. If he painted a landscape or he painted a flower, he wouldn't have been able to sign it fast enough before someone's dropping all kinds of money to have it. But if it's a face someone doesn't know, it's harder for people to say, yeah, I want to hang that on my wall.
It is. Yeah, I didn't learn a lot in art school because, you know, university art department. But one thing one teacher said to me that has been a career-long endeavor, she said, you have to figure out how to make a portrait more than a portrait. And I think that's what you've hit on here, where, yeah, these are good likenesses of these kids, I'm assuming. They look like good likenesses, but it's so much more than a portrait. It's a narrative, your storytelling.
Right.
And not only that, but it's open-ended storytelling. It's not like you're shoving it down someone's throat. You know?
Right. There's storytelling, but it's not illustration.
Right.
Not to put down illustration, but I mean, I know artists who they're all about storytelling, but it's a definite story. I mean, you're not really confused about what's going on and what you're supposed to know about what's going on.
Right.
And that's not the direction that this or any of my paintings are going in. It's somehow a narrative that someone can, even if they don't look like the person or don't have that exact experience, they still, it's like a more, how do I say it? Almost like a more of a universal idea about, in this instance, childhood, you know, curiosity and things like that. More of a general, larger concept. And if you can put that into the painting, then people can insert themselves, because everybody, that's sort of a universal experience, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, you know, my memory must be really failing me because I keep thinking about that weekend. I could have sworn Tim Reese and you were in the same year, but I trust you on that one. But the reason I ask
go ahead.
The reason I ask is because I remember, I guess it was a separate year that Tim Reese was one of my top 3, and then yours was one of my top 3 choices and I thought it was the same year. But but what I loved about both of them is just what you just described. It's a narrative without being an illustration. And I'm not opposed to illustration either. I mean, I do biblical illustrations, right? But there's something, yours more so even than Tim's, but there's something so much more approachable about a painting that doesn't force you to think a certain thing, but asks you to think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what a lot of portraiture, not to not to criticize it, but that's what a lot of it is missing. And that's why when right from the beginning, even in those early days when I probably told you, I'm not just a still life painter, I'm going to paint all kinds of things. My approach, I had determined even at that point was I find most portrait painting kind of boring to look at. And so I want to, what would it take for me to find it interesting? I was just basically solving my own problem of what would I want to look at if I had to live with this painting? What would I be most attracted to? And so I find that that's not necessarily a unique issue. I think just in general, a lot of people, except for artists, the ones that buy head studies are other artists, because they're looking at technique, they're looking at it on a whole nother level.
Right.
But a lot of people, that's not what they're looking for. So for that particular painting, and what I've determined would be any painting that would include a figure or a portrait, whatever you want to call it, it would have to have more in it. So that's why it's got still life and an interesting kind of background and objects. And it's funny, I look at this one now and I think, it's a little too simple. I should have added more,
What? Really? Where do you feel like it's too simple? It's not simple at all.
I don't know. I feel like that now I would treat as like the first layer of the painting, and I would paint a whole nother layer on top of it.
Isn't that frustrating? It's like being an artist, your technology, and every year, your previous year is obsolete. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is. It's sort of nice though, to look back on and see. Sometimes I progress and I realize, I've gone astray from what I originally might have intended. And sometimes I'll go back, to those things. What's nice is I have a record of all of those iterations.
Yeah, that's true.
Those seasons. And so I can actually look back on them and make a more informed decision today, by looking at some of the ones that maybe weren't totally right, or maybe were void of what I know now, but there was still something there that I knew.
It's funny. As soon as I said that, in my mind, in my soul, I was like, no, that's not the worst thing. Because, that years ago I painted a painting that took me, I don't know, a decade to outdo.
Wow.
And I thought I would never paint a better painting. That's worse than what I just said. That's a worse feeling. I would rather be obsolete the last year than be obsolete this year.
It is a little, I know what you mean. It's a little rough sometimes you actually want to look back on your old work and feel that you've improved. And it's a little disheartening to look back on old work and think, wow, that was better,
Yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing.
How did I do that? Where did I go wrong?
Yeah. So true. So true.
Yeah.
Since I've got Portrait Society on the mind, tell me what you're doing at the Portrait Society this year.
I'm going to do pastel.
Oh, you are? Awesome.
Yeah,
main stage or breakout?
The paint off and breakout.
Okay, awesome. Are you doing it with another artist or by yourself?
I think I should just be by myself as far as I know.
Okay, yeah. Great.
I kind of loosely agree to things.
That's how we all are.
I just tell them what I don't want to do. Okay. And then, so.
Wait, I'm curious. What don't you want to do?
I don't want to do the critiques.
Oh, I know. Those are hard.
I don't know how, I guess, I don't know. I'm sure that in many cases it's helpful. I just don't know how helpful it is. I mean, I don't know. I just would feel bad sitting there and telling someone what to do. It's different when it's in a class over several days and you're you have time to explore concepts and really delve into something,
Right.
introduce things and show them things visually. I don't know. Yeah. So I'm not crazy about that. I don't I don't I don't know if there's anything else I flat out turned down. Well, I don't want to like do like the workshops or the classes or anything like that. So and then everything else is not something that you sign up for. If I could skip the banquet, I would do that, I guess.
I think you
I
can
would
skip
love
the
to.
banquet. You don't have to go to the banquet.
Yeah, I might, but my friends will probably not be happy.
Yeah, you don't have to unless you're in the show, and you are not allowed to ever
I
enter
know,
again.
they changed that after I won. And not because I won, but I was the last year that you could re-enter even if you were previous winners.
Oh, so you can re-enter.
No, I cannot. I'm up until the year the reason I think it changed
Yeah.
is because the year that I won, the runner up, the one who almost got the Draper Prize,
Yeah.
basically, had won it several years prior.
Oh,
So
I
they
wasn't aware of
technically,
that. So this is a new
yeah,
rule.
they technically almost, I mean, you have to figure they got first place. So their work was definitely qualified to take home the Draper Prize, but they had won the Draper Prize, I don't know however many years prior. And so I think that made them kind of step back and think, oh, we need to make this a lifetime achievement kind of
Oh, I had
award.
no idea. I thought it always been that way.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Oh,
No.
yeah, thanks for doing that one. Although I've
Most
never wanted
shows are
to.
not most shows are not that way. I mean, that's kind of I have mixed feelings about it. I think because it's only been, what is this now, the 25th year or something. So that's kind of not very many people. At that time, it was the 20th year. And so I understood them wanting to make it kind of a you win and that's it. But I don't know. I mean, most other shows are not that way. The Prix de West isn't that way. You can win multiple times, or I think other shows you can win multiple times.
I don't know how I feel about it, but my gut feeling is I would rather compete with the winners if I were to submit. I want to know where I stand with the winners. But
Yeah.
that's just I don't know. But I could see an argument either way. Let's pull up some of your work. So, yeah, so here we're on Instagram. I'm going to scroll up here to the top. Is there anything in particular you'd like to talk about?
No.
Okay. Well, I have a
I
question
don't
about
think
this one
so.
then. So, what made you start moving into pastel? I mean, it seems like a natural progression for you because it's a pastel, particularly the way you're using it, has such a painterly quality to it. And honestly,
Yeah.
they're almost indistinguishable from your paintings until you really analyze them and go, yeah, that's not paint.
Well,
But
it is paint.
technically, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
it's
it's
paint.
pigment. It's the
Yeah.
same.
So
Same
okay,
pigment.
I want to talk about that for a sec. How it's pigment without the oil. So what makes it paint? I've always wondered about that because a
Well,
lot of people call pastel paint. I think of it as more
yeah.
synonymous with charcoal.
Yeah, I suppose I get that. Watercolor doesn't have oil either, you know. It's just that there's not the same kind of a binder,
Right.
you know. All the paints have a different binder. Pastel has some binder in it, you know, to hold it together. It's a dry paint, you
Okay.
know.
Okay. I mean, I'm not
It's
arguing with
the
you. I just wonder
same.
why we decided that as an art world that this is paint. And
I have those same questions, so it's
yeah.
not. I don't feel like you're. I am not. I haven't been doing this long enough to be irate at the same questions that all the. It's the funniest thing. Like this, there's this
Yeah.
whole world of these pastel artists, and if you say, I'm constantly questioning what I'm saying. Like I gave workshops and demos, main stage demos at the last big conference that they had, and I'm demoing. I mean, all these people are watching all of these established, some of them very established pastel painters, and I'm showing them what I know, but I'm constantly asking, like, is that what you call it? So is this how you describe it? Because I don't know the jargon, I don't know what's acceptable, what's
Except you're
unacceptable.
master at it.
Well, so what I know so far, what I've heard is that it's the same pigment as all the other paints. It's just a different binder, and it's a dry
No,
medium.
I know the story, but here's the thing, and maybe this is a question for the ether and the people outside, but I'm going to throw it out there. Is if I took a colored pencil and I made it a half an inch thick, and I drew a flower or whatever with it, it's got so much wax in it and binder, so to speak.
Mhm.
Is it paint now? Like,
Well, I don't know what I don't know what pigment. I know that pastel, like pastel pencils or pastel sticks, are totally different from like a colored pencil. They're not the same.
yeah. Do they call
As far as
pastel
the material.
pencils paint too?
No, they call them pastel pencils, but I think if you did a complete work with pastel pencil, it would not be like you wouldn't be able to enter it into a pastel painting competition.
I don't understand these rules. Someone in the comments explain to me why pastel is different than pastel
And
pencils.
pass
I
it
don't
on to
get it.
me. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't
know what
get it.
it is either.
But the bottom line is, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. It is what it is. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful image. But
And
to
they're a
my,
lot of fun to do. I really enjoy it.
I think they'd be a blast. I bought some pastels years ago. I haven't tried it yet. I need to. Because I think what would be fun about them is just the optical mixing, because you're forced to mix on the paper instead of on a palette.
Well, yeah, or you spend $1 million and you buy every color that and value that there is.
Which do you do? Mix or buy
I
every
spend
value?
$1 million. Yeah. I mean, of course you do some layering. You're basically, doesn't matter how many you buy, you're still missing something. And so
Okay.
there's a lot of layering that color over another in order to get a totally different color. But having a wide variety is nice to have. I would say that it's actually frustrating, and you would probably run into this too. Though I haven't watched you paint, but most artists who know what they're doing, I mean, they're mixing color in seconds, and
Hmm.
testing whatever. It's rapid. So much time is spent trying to find the stupid color and value that you want
I bet.
in your mix of things, and you're like, I could have made this color in 3 seconds with oil paint. So it's yeah, it's that's the most time consuming part of it, is finding the right
Yeah, I
fit.
imagine you put a color down and you're like, oh, it's 2 shades too light. And then you
Yeah,
just got to look for one that's 2 shades darker. And then you put it
yeah,
down
and
again
you
and
hope
it's,
that you're organized enough with the pastels that you can find it. Okay, if
yeah.
this is too, just a hair too light and too red, so now you're comparing it. Okay, what would be a little darker and a little
Oh
more
God, that
yellow?
sounds tedious.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh
it is.
man, that sounds rough. Well, now I have a whole, another level of appreciation for this, because I'm looking at all of these brilliant colors and imagining all the searching that went into it. Like, that's one thing about pastels that I find so, interesting, is just the richness of the pigment. And I imagine a lot of that's because it's not all tinted with a yellow binder with oil.
It's funny that people say that, pastelists uh, say that about themselves. I mean, their own work, but it's not as it is extremely rich, but it doesn't look that way because there is no oil. or kind of liquid in it. It's actually, to me, it looks duller than an oil painting.
Oh, so on the internet, it probably comes off about the same, but in real life,
I'd say,
without the
well, I mean,
gloss.
in person, people think that they're the same. I think it's just me. I don't know, but because it would be like if you took an oil painting and you sprayed matte varnish on it.
Oh, right. All the
So
darks
it's the
sink in.
same. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you still can get pretty dark. It's just that everything looks a little bit, I don't know, it looks a little bit softer. And if you took that exact same pigment and mixed it with oil, it would be way too dark or
Hmm.
saturated. I mean, it's just like these extremes. I don't know. It's funny to me. It does look rich, um, but it's softer to me than an oil painting as far as intensity goes.
So how
That's actually
smooth?
one of the reasons I like it, because it keeps me from being too kind of garish with the color.
Really? Okay. So how smooth of a transition was this for you? Are you hiding a lot of your duds, or was it a pretty natural
That's
transition?
those kinds of questions only make me sound like a jerk.
So we know the answer. It doesn't though,
You're
because
asking, you're asking for, I mean, so what happened was I have a little paint group. We get together on Saturdays at a local gallery, and the lady who owns the gallery kind of heads everything up. And I just like having something local kind of to do. And so she primarily works in pastel. And so she kind of just, wanted me to try it, like, just for fun. And the first one I did, she sold like that day, because
hmm
it really is exactly it's all
it's
the same things.
painting.
It doesn't matter if you're painting watercolor, acrylic, or oil or whatever. It's still drawing color, value, edges, composition. So the learning curve it's a whole different set of tools, and so a different set of techniques, and that was the struggle, just trying to figure out what can you do, how does this move, and what does it feel like, and what's allowed.
Right.
So much of it is just like, I'm doing this, but I'm not sure if this is what you're supposed to do, and
I would
kind of
imagine
figuring.
you'd have to take a minute to decide, especially with your work, because one of the things I love about your work, and I think is unique to your work, is your edge quality. You have these very dynamic, wispy edges and kind of lost and found forms. I mean, most people would say lost and found lines, but you literally let forms come in and out of focus with your, hardening and softening of edges. But you would have to do that in a very different way with a dry stick than you do with a wet brush. So I imagine you had to take a
Yeah,
minute
that's
to just
interesting.
figure that out.
Yeah, you once you get, because it's kind of like sandpaper that you're working on,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't just start rubbing it unless, well, you could, and then you could go rob a bank later because you'll have no fingerprints. But once there's a layer kind of the pastel on there, you can start to
Oh,
use your hands, and so actually it becomes pretty quickly. You can transition, and it becomes pretty innate because you just start putting. I mean, some people oil paint that way. They just put a brushstroke down, and they'll break an edge or something just by using their fingers. So it's sort of it's quicker than you think. You get used to it faster than you think.
okay.
The other thing that I would say really helped, and probably I might not have adapted as quickly as I did, except that the very first step to all of these pastel paintings that I do is I put some color down, and then I brush with rubbing alcohol.
Oh,
So I actually do a painting
oh,
with the pastel um,
no kidding.
under.
So are you saying that once you get a layer of pastel down, it almost flows like paint? It can kind of move? No, you're not saying that.
So the first layer is putting a little bit of it down, sort of approximate color and value maybe of each object, but just really rough, and rubbing alcohol with a brush and brushing that.
Okay, not a layer.
Then,
What I meant was once you start to build up some.
yeah, and then and it also, I should say, it depends on the surface that you use. Not
Oh,
everyone uses a sanded kind of surface. You can use a smoother one. There's different stuff out there. I like the grittier kind of stuff because I like the way it grabs the pigment. So because I use the rougher stuff, I can't just start using my hand to blend or anything right away. So once it does get enough of it on there, though, you've added maybe a couple layers, or you put enough pigment down, you can, because it fills in all those grooves, you can kind of move it around with your finger and not worry about sanding your fingerprints off. So, it's all problem solving. So you just figure out different ways to meet the need that you have. If you need to soften an edge, of course, that first step with the alcohol wash, you're actually using a brush. You can actually, blend the colors together. The next layer, you need to soften an edge, but there's not enough pigment on. You can use put your maybe shapes of color next to each other and take another mid-tone or something and just kind of go between those two and soften it. You know what I'm saying?
yep, yep.
And then once there's enough pigment down, you have the option to introduce your finger into the mix and blend it that way. So, I mean, that's all of painting. Basically, you're constantly just trying to problem solve.
Yeah. So I wanted to show.
This is why the whole idea of this is how you do it, or this is the way to hold the brush. This is what, the dogma that we talked about earlier.
Right.
And having to get people to totally change their thinking, which is very difficult to do in the course of like a workshop. It'd be different to work with people long term, but getting them to unlearn those things and realize that no, there's no rule. It's you trying to figure out how to do the thing you achieve the look that you're after, or the feeling you're after, whatever.
Right. One thing I want to ask you about is something, it relates to what I'd mentioned earlier. I had said that one thing you're so good at is creating forms that are almost like lost and found forms. We talk about in art all the time, lost and found edges, lost and found lines, but you have like entire petals that almost merge into the background. And then when we step back, it's just all comes into focus. And it's like that thing we all geek out about as artists, where it's the beautiful brush marks up front, up close, and then we step back and it comes into focus. In fact, when I was in college, another thing that someone said to me, maybe this was college, I can't remember, that a painting should look good from 3 inches away, 3 feet away, and 30 feet away. And I would say that you're hitting that mark big time. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's I think it's my attempt at having lost and found edges. You're sort of taking it a step further. I've never actually. I'm not aware. Or I wasn't aware. I wasn't considering that I was creating lost and found forms. So that's kind of a new thing. I like it. It sounds
you can have it.
Really good. Yeah, I guess maybe I'm doing that, but it's in an attempt to just have lost and found edges. But and I run into this so frequently in workshops that I actually created. I made like a video, and so it's a download on my website where it's not a demonstration. It's just me going through the process of analyzing and observing something that's in front of you so that you can break that apart and then interpret it with paint. And so the thing I run into so often when we hit this idea of edges, we have to address that many people are just making them up.
Hmm.
And so I think people will look at my work or others who paint sort of in this manner, and assume or presume that we're making up the edges, and they'll even analyze it, or they'll teach other people kind of falsely using our work as an example, that see how they've created this edge and made it the focal point, and then they made the other edges looser, or secondary. And that's not what I'm doing at all, or at least not entirely. I create the edge that I want by how I set it up, because I make all of my decisions about those things, by squinting and comparing. And I know everyone kind of thinks, oh yeah, well, I do that, but truly, it's based on the information that's actually there. I'm not just sort of flippantly making an edge hard or making one soft. I'm trying to observe what I think is actually occurring, and then I might push it a little bit, but it's in direct relation to what I'm the information that I'm taking in. So, like this example that you have up here, that edge between the two petals in the center, the light and the dark, I determined that when I set it up, meaning that I created that hard edge as soon as I put those two contrasting values together.
Hmm.
If I wanted to change that edge, I don't do it in my painting, I would do it in my setup. If I didn't want a hard edge there, I would rearrange or introduce or reduce what's there, so that I eliminate that contrast.
So when you squint, what you're saying is that it's contrast that's at least accentuating the hard edges while squinting.
Yeah, so it's the values that, at least that's the first thing I consider when I am trying to discern what edges that scene is creating.
Okay.
And so where there's a vast amount of contrast, obviously, even now, with the painting, you squint down the things where there's that kind of jolting contrast. Those are just, they're discernible even up until your eyes close. So those are usually my harder edges. That's not the only thing I consider, because there are other things. The turn, or the form. If something turns gradually or abruptly, that's going to also determine an edge. And then the inequality, of the surface. Is it fur? That's going to determine some of the edge work.
Right. So are you suggesting that you can't successfully soften the edge between the shadowed petal? I don't know my flowers. What's that white flower?
An orchid.
An orchid, sorry. I'm terrible at flowers.
That's all right.
Between the dark side of the orchid petal and the light petal behind it, like if you were to soften that edge, it's completely inappropriate regardless of where it is in the painting due to its contrast.
Yeah, if you
because it's not what you see squinting.
That would not be real life. I mean, you can do that and manipulate it with a camera, because it can only focus on one thing at a time. And even the human eye only focuses on one part at a time, but you're not just painting that one part. Your eye moves around. You're painting it. Your eye is not meant to just focus on one. You're moving around this whole scene of whatever, in this case, being flowers. So if you wanted a softer edge somewhere, set it up so that there's less contrast in that area, and it's going to require softer edges or looser, you know, whatever. But there's more than one way to do this, and so there are no rules, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's you problem solving. In From what I have done, first of all, I don't care if I have hard edges, some obscure part of the painting. I don't have just hard edges on the focal point. So that's a rule that I don't adhere to. And then secondly, there's other ways of creating kind of a hierarchy. I think everyone just thinks of edges as the way to do that. Some maybe would do that with color, and you could. You could also do that with just sort of the level or degree of finish. I can have a kind of contrasty, harder edge, but fewer brushstrokes. If
Mm-hmm.
it's near the fringes of the painting, and then much more uh, kind of intentional, or I mean, it's all intentional, but just a more finished area where my focal point is. You know what I mean? It's more painted, more or less painted, thicker or thinner paint. You know, there's all kinds of ways of creating a hierarchy in order to make and maintain a focal area.
Okay.
And for some reason, most people, and I would say amateur people or amateur artists, are the ones that heavily rely on just softening everything that they don't want to be the focal point and making their focal area the most crisp.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that you're doing this in almost entirely perceptually and not principle based. It's like I am
Yes.
looking, I'm squinting, I'm comparing. This is what I see when I squint. When these little pink flowers are kind of in the halftone area, they tend to blend into the shadows when I'm
Yeah.
squinting.
Right.
And
Right.
when I get that crisp shadowed petal next to the light petal, I even squinting, I see a hard edge. So it's absolutely perceptual.
Yes. And I allow, I'll break an edge even if I want to create a looser quality of painting, I might adopt something in order to achieve a certain look, but I'm still starting with what am I actually seeing? I'm asking myself that question while I'm looking at it. What's happening? What am I seeing? Um, so yeah, I guess it's mostly or entirely perception based.
Yeah, so I was painting. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I was painting a landscape recently, and I know a landscape is different, so maybe you'll have a different perspective on this. But and an artist who I respect came up to me. I asked his opinion, and he said you need a hard edge up front in this lower left quadrant in order to add interest. And I thought he wasn't. I don't. He's not wrong, as you said. Art is a lot more than a dogmatic set of principles, right? There's a lot more to it. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not whether he's right or wrong. My question is, what are your thoughts on that? Does one ever need to apply a hard edge simply for design's sake? Or even in landscape, would you be completely perceptual and say, no, I don't see enough contrast there, no hard
It's
edge?
going to it okay, it's going to look like a glitch in the system if you have established if there's a underlying um, principle in your painting for what determines the edges, the edge quality. If everywhere else in the painting you have made those decisions based on observation,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly you break that because you simply wanted something there that wasn't there, in this case an edge, it's going to look awkward.
So it's like rattling off a paragraph in English and dropping in a word in French. And it's like, what did you
Yeah,
just say?
it's gonna look like a glitch in the system
Right.
because you have, without knowing it or unknowingly, you have established the laws that govern this little world you've created, and then you suddenly break that law, it's like someone floating down the street. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So now you could, if you're experienced enough, like let's say with landscape painting, you think, well, what's happening there is not creating the edge that I would like to have for design's sake. What would it have to be in order for me to get that edge?
I like that.
So you could, that's why I say there's no rules, but there are physical laws that govern the universe.
Right.
So the way that the human eye and mind works within this dimension that we're in, you can see more information in this kind of light. You see less information in the shadows. So you put a hard, really crisp, discernible edge in an area that you shouldn't be able to see that much detail in.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to look off. So what would you have to adjust? What would have to change in order for you to get that thing that you want for design's sake? So it's a more, I would say that this is just a more thoughtful approach, that
Okay.
instead of just sort of like, oh, I just want it this way and that. Well, that's fine unless you're going for realism,
I know you didn't mean that as a jab, but it's kind of funny.
Well,
That's
no,
fine
I'm
unless
just,
you want to be a painter.
no. I mean, I'm saying,
No, I know you didn't mean it that way.
it's not going to look like real life.
Right,
And you
right,
can
right.
tell people, and people make up all kinds of fluffy sayings and reasons and things, but really they're painting the way that a camera sees. I see so many of them. They're not really truly analyzing what's in front of them and trying to paint real life as loose or as tightly as they want, regardless of the style. But they're sort of
Mm-hmm.
moving away from real life.
That's brilliant. I appreciate that insight. All right, I want to look at the bigger version of this. I assume on Instagram you have the full painting on here. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think so. And
Oh, bummer.
that's just that small. I mean, it's not a very big painting.
I want to let's pull up something more involved.
That's a pastel.
Oh, dude, you kind of make me sick a little bit, Daniel. This is so good.
Why?
Because it's so good. I'm envious. Yeah,
Well,
it's just
saying
gorgeous.
to like have someone pull up your work, and all that I do in my mind is I think, oh God, I just want to pick it all apart.
Yeah, we're all
Like,
that way. No, it's just beautiful. Just beautiful. And so I'm thinking about the conversation we just had, and it makes perfect sense. Like all this stuff is so close in value in the background. If you squint at it, you're not, and then you got this high contrast stuff where you really push the edges nice and crisp. Yeah, that's great.
Well, and the other thing that people do, I mean, that I run into, because I teach it all the time in workshops, and the longer, and Richard talks about this in his book. I remember reading it in some part of his book, how the longer you stare into, let's say a shadow area, the more your pupils are going to dilate so that they can take in more information. So it's going to people are misreading, I think, what's in front of them, and they think, well, I can see the edge of that, or I can. Well, yes, but you're not just painting that one little section. You're painting this larger scene, so you need to see what it looks like all at once.
Right.
And squinting helps you do that.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing, you're not just making it all out of focus, you're seeing the way that these various objects, these various shapes of color, or whatever it is, interact with each other, what they look like while existing next to each other. And so it just makes logical sense to me. I mean, all of this, at least in my head that I've shared thus far, it seems like a logical approach. It seems
Oh,
logical to think,
perfectly.
yeah, you would see less information where there's less light. You know, it just there's a it's not a it's not based on feeling or some kind of an emotional experience. I'm not an emotional person. I'm fairly logical, I'd say.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. It seems very logical. And it's actually sort of empowering that while it's not easy, conceptually, you've made it very simple,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
I mean, it's obviously hard to execute, difficult to execute, but simple in concept. I think it's sometimes easy to get intimidated by painting. And when you think of all the principles involved, and you're almost just stripping that all away and saying, just look, just squint and compare, squint and compare, squint and compare.
Act of actually painting it, you know, I mean, I get into debates with it, but only with emotional people, you know, as far as if there's a debate that ensues, because they want to sort of hold on to, they believe that it's a purely emotional experience. And I believe that the act of actually doing it, the work that you put in is, there's no emotion in it at all. It's all, it's just problem solving, which is applying logic to this. So it is simple, and I think people fill their heads with all of this other stuff, and then try to take that into their painting, and it you know, it makes it harder probably than it is.
You know, I have a theory about that. And I could be totally wrong. I'm probably wrong about many of my theories, but I bet if we could,
We probably all are.
yeah, I bet if we could dig up all the great masters before media, before we had access to all these ideas, and I'm talking about even the old school media, television and newspapers,
Mhm.
before art historians started defining how an artist is, or sort of shaping an artist's personality
Mhm.
for future artists,
Right.
that all the great artists were very intellectual about in their approach.
Mhm.
And only now
Mhm.
are artists raised to believe that art is sort of this frou-frou emotional thing and not a craft.
Mhm.
You with me on that?
Yeah.
It looks
Oh
like
yeah.
you
No.
are.
I early on in those early years, I'm so glad I didn't get into any art school or even just a mainstream university. I almost went, and then I found out if I went to like the state university or something, I'd have to take 2 years of general ed, and I didn't want to waste any time on anything that would keep me from painting. I thought I just want to dive into it completely. I'm so glad I did, because I feel like I would have um, not discovered what I had so early on. And I noticed when I did start to meet other artists, particularly those that are at the top of still at the top of our field, they also happened to be the smartest people I had ever
I
interacted with.
agree.
And so I made that connection pretty quickly. I'm not saying you have to be super intelligent. I mean, we all have our various strengths or weaknesses, but it just seemed like they were the most logical. They were the most pragmatic kinds of thinkers, and they thought for themselves. You know, they weren't spouting off what someone else had said all the time. They weren't reciting whatever the rules were. They were just sort of problem solving, and then maybe they'd verbalize it to you. And yeah, I think people are over. There's so much out there. They're just inundated with information, and not all of it is relevant. Not all of it is right. And there's just a lot of fluff. And then you get people who aren't even artists, who they're these self-proclaimed authorities on it. They're known as critics, and all they are is an over-educated, overpaid, you know, con artist who's convinced everyone that they are an authority on art, and then they describe what the artist was thinking. I
Yeah.
always love that. Or what the artist felt, as if they knew, you know. And I think that's really polluted a lot of the thinking. And unfortunately, not just for the masses, but for the artists themselves.
Yeah, artists, young artists are trying to shape themselves into these sort of fantasy artists that have been created
Yeah,
by the historians. Yeah, I that's how I
yeah.
feel. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, you know, we had talked about the Porch Society earlier. That's the thing I noticed when I went to the Porch Society for the first time. I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys and women are all brilliant. Some
Hmm.
of the smartest people I've ever met are
Yeah,
these great painters are. Um,
yeah.
all right, let's look at a few more of your pieces. What about an oil painting?
So that one is an oil. I mean, it's kind of hard to a photo taken with my cell phone, but
Right.
an oil done from life. And then if you go, I think up a couple of
Okay, I just got to
rows, you'll
point out how
see.
hardcore you are, right? Like, yeah, you've got, I think this is the Strata setup down here,
Oh yeah,
but
I forgot my
I love how you
snacks.
forgot your thing and then you just like stuck it between, stuck your panel right in there.
Yeah,
That's brilliant.
and
That's hardcore.
that
Problem
happens,
solving.
but it's really, yeah. Well, it really sucks when that happens when you're in another country.
Oh, you forgot it for the whole trip. It's not just in your hotel.
Oh yeah, I didn't know. No, that whole
Oh,
trip I didn't. Yeah.
that blows. That
Yeah.
blows.
Hey, it worked. It worked. So up just above it where you are, right there, that's a pastel version
No,
of
that's
it. No,
oil.
no, that's the oil. Sorry, that's the oil version. Up that one is
This
the
one
pastel
is
version.
pastel.
Yeah. I guess that's
Okay.
not a good example because
Well,
you can't really see it.
so how do you switch back and forth? Which one do you prefer? Or is it
I don't
just
know.
you? Oh, so that's why you can switch back and forth because it's like you don't have a favorite.
Well, not right at this moment because pastel is still newer for me, so I wouldn't be able to probably really decide like, oh, this is one I think is my favorite. It's still
Right.
new, so it's um I think what it is it's sort of a relief. There's even though they're exactly the same principles, there's something about you I mean, you know how it is. You it's the same probably or similar maybe going from oil to charcoal. Sometimes you just feel like doing something different, but really you're doing the same.
No, I get it.
You're
Yeah.
still getting your work done, you know, you're still being productive, you're still doing something to add to, you know, you're not wasting your time, but it's just a little different enough that it feels like a relief or it feels fun. And so I
Yeah.
just kind of go back and forth, you know.
So one thing I want to point out for my students' sake, you may or may not know, but I think you do because you were here. I have my atelier here. I've got 12 apprentices.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah, I
thing
wanted
that
that.
the thing that kicks everyone's butt are ellipses.
Oh,
Everyone hates ellipses. Whenever a student gets into having to draw something with an ellipse or a circle, it's like they all start ripping their hair out. And I don't know if it's for that reason that I always notice when I see good ellipses in a painting, but that's one thing I've noticed about your paintings is they're always spot on.
well, I'm glad you think so. I'm glad you clicked on one that I feel was very good or good enough.
Yeah.
I still have days. It's not that I. It's interesting. It's not that I can't see them or I can't paint them. Sometimes there's a visual. Sometimes I have to do it. You almost have to do it inaccurately to make it look
Oh,
accurate
I know.
because you're
Totally.
dealing with it. I mean, it's nothing if you're just drawing a line, you know, a linear ellipse. That'd be nothing. But you're dealing with this form, and it's an optical illusion because you've got shadow and light, and then the reverse of it on the outside, shadow and light. And plus the color changes and all of that. So sometimes it's a perfect ellipse, but it looks off, and you have to like it's awful. I hate.
I
Some
know.
days I
I
do.
know.
I hate. No.
But that's why you're getting them right. So and I often say to my students, don't, in this case and in many cases, don't just draw what you see, draw it right.
Sure.
And I think that's why you're getting them right, because you're doing that. But it's
The other thing you can do is have half of it obscured or parts of it obscured with flowers,
a painter that just has teacups everywhere, but none of the tops are showing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
funny. So one of the things I've always wondered about you and other painters who I admire that are good flower painters. To me personally, I got to get him on the podcast as well. I think the two best flower painters that I'm aware of alive today would be you and Michael Klein. And you're very different though, but he's also a brilliant flower painter.
Oh, he's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. And I remember he was here at my studio as well once, and he's very romantic about it. He's talking about the innocence and of the flower and how beautiful it is. And he's very, I don't know, it's to hear him talk about it, it's almost like he's going to spout off a poem, just ad lib right off about his flowers. But it's cool because he's clearly passionate about it. So I wanted to ask you about that. What you clearly are passionate about this subject. What is it about the subject that draws you in?
Well, I
I'm not expecting
bring this up.
poetry, so
No,
it could be
you're
just
not going to
shapes.
get it.
Yeah.
First of all, I hate poetry, so you're definitely not getting any of that. I bring this up a lot when I'm trying to help other artists, especially young artists, in what direction to go, because you do at some point have to kind of decide what you most want to paint, or you can paint everything. But I happened to paint the things that I loved before painting was a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So my earliest memories, and you'll hear this with all kinds of other artists. I think the ones that are most happy doing the thing that they love doing, they're painting something that they genuinely are fond of, and it's almost like an excuse to look at this thing for a long amount of time. You're going to paint it. So my earliest memories are of flowers, plants, just being fascinated with being in the garden, And so it's not something that it's almost like it was an innocent or a pure kind of thing, because it's nice that it happens to be a subject that sells really well too. Everybody loves flowers. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people do. And but it was really an organic kind of thing for me. And so I grow them. If I can't be painting, I want to be out in the garden. I genuinely love studying them and looking at them, and it's not really a painting subject for me. It's something I'm actually fond of.
Okay, so one thing I've always wondered about you though with flowers is they seem like a really hard subject. As I said, I've never really painted flowers unless it's part of a larger landscape or a larger multi-figure painting, and they're always a very small part of it. But you've got tables full of flowers, and I know you do some of this stuff, if not all of it, from life, but at least some of it. Are you painting just really fast, or are you putting these things together kind of piecemeal, just a little bit at a time?
Well, yes.
Both.
All of that, because first of all, it is primarily from life. The exception is that series of paintings where there's like kind of a twilight light behind some of those roses, where it's really ephemeral. But otherwise, it's almost entirely from life. But it's also years of working and growing these flowers and knowing the forms, just like someone knows human anatomy. Of course, you're painting what you see, but there's also a knowledge behind that, you know what to look for, you know the potential of something. You know, when I say potential, you know that you know the how far you can exaggerate, or how close you have to get something in order for it to look like that thing without it having to be exact.
Right.
And flowers are actually, I'd say they're more forgiving. When I teach, I always tell everyone that just to help kind of shake them up, you know, you'll hear people, and I'm sure you do all the time, where they can paint this and they can't paint that. Like,
Yeah.
I can paint landscapes, I just can't paint figures. Well, that means that you probably have some understanding with value, and you have no skill where drawing is concerned, you know.
Hmm.
Or maybe you have some understanding of color, but your values are really weak. These different subject matters put a different demand on, though, a combination of those five elements: drawing, painting, value, color, edges, you know, composition. And so um, a lot of portrait painters I find are exceptional at drawing and value, and their color maybe is they're maybe less skilled
Or
when it comes to
design.
color. Or yeah, but they can get away with it, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It'd be kind of hard to get away with bad design, but um, there's less of a demand put on the thing that they're weaker in. And so when they go to paint flowers, I'd say it puts a very high demand on color.
Mm.
And so that, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you know, they're so hard to paint. But they're actually quite forgiving because they don't put a huge demand on drawing.
Yeah.
Most people aren't familiar enough with the flowers. I don't know. It's not like a human where you can tell with the eyes, you know, like that's not right.
Hmm.
There's a smaller margin of error there. And so flowers, they put a really high demand on color, and of course all good painting should have good drawing and value and all of those things, but it's just a different kind of ratio. So I actually find them quite forgiving,
Hmm.
and I don't think people realize that once you kind of have a general understanding of the form of that particular species.
Right. Yeah, but I just wanted to point out, but you clearly don't have an issue with the other skills either, because your drawings are absolutely spot on, as we'd
Well,
seen in these other ones.
well, thank you.
Yeah,
I
beautiful
don't know
work.
if they're spot on, but it's an attempt.
All right, so my last question for you, I'm really curious about, because you have a unique background in that you really have no teachers, at least prior to you starting your career. So, what advice would you give someone who is aspiring to become an artist?
Well, there's more than one way, first of all, because there are guys at the top that took all different paths. Some of them had mentors, some of them had a formal education, some go to an atelier, some go to a mainstream school, and they still find a way, you know. And so my advice is always just to uh, research, see what the options are, and then I don't know if this is if this is possible, but it's sort of like what can you say to help them avoid some of the pitfalls, because it's easy to get swept up or caught up in what we were talking about earlier, which is someone else's dogma.
Right.
And, you know, so I would say learn and imitate and do that because it is necessary, but keep in mind that there's more than one way, you know. I think while you're in it, you should devote to it. I don't regret any instance where if I, you know, if someone is, I tell people this in a workshop all the time. For the time that we're together, and I'm the instructor and you're the student, adopt everything I say. just follow everything, even if you have a totally different method. Because then you're taking in information. And then when you go home, decide what you're going to keep, what you're going to throw away, or what you might shelve for later. So I don't know. My advice is uh, look into, research all the options and see what you think will work best for you, and then just take everything with a proverbial grain of salt.
I appreciate that. So I actually don't usually have a follow-up question, but I do in this case. Do you think that your path could work for anyone? Or do you think that
Other
everyone...
than me.
No, 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 no. I mean, obviously there are others who it'll work for. I'm saying
uh,
anyone across the board, that your path of checking out a book or saving up for one book and becoming a professional artist, it would work for anyone.
no, I don't, again, sometimes these things are, it's good to say them or to talk about them, but it kind of makes me seem pretentious. I would say it's totally the exception and not the rule. And it's not because I'm so smart or I'm so special. It's just the variables that were in play.
Right.
And this is how it worked for me. I was home educated. I spent my whole educational years, they were spent teaching myself. I mean, even though my being home educated, your parents are your teacher, primarily my mother. By the time you're 10, 11 years old, all my mom was having to do was give me the books and then check the work. Because you get into this mode of of teaching yourself, you're problem solving, and it was a perfect system for me and my temperament, my personality. So I was already in that mode. So to me, it made perfect sense. Oh, I'll just go get the book and I'll read it and I'll follow along. I'm already in that self-taught way of
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And so one thing after another, and then the magazine and the cover of the magazine and all that. And when I say that was my kind of breakout, in every sense of the word, it was from that moment on. It's not that I never had to do anything. I still had to paint. I still had to, do all of the things that everybody has to do. But I never again had to, um, I didn't have to contact galleries. I don't have to, everything came out of that. So
Right.
it's totally random. You can't and shouldn't base any decision on your career path on something like that. That's just a totally random thing. The thing that aspiring artists should do is make priority number one getting better and getting the information necessary to be better. And whatever method you take to get that information based on you, your temperament, your variables, where you live, what you have access to, all of the things that are unique to you, um, you just make it a priority to get that information in whatever way you can. And for some, it's going to be going to an atelier, not for everyone. And for
Right.
some, it would be, finding a mentor or something, someone that you can work with one on one. But not everyone can do that, right?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, what's available to you, and take advantage of whatever those opportunities are. With Richard, we met, and he had seen my work, and I wanted to meet him, of course, because I had been studying his book for 3 years, and now he was my teacher from afar. And he said, when we met, we had dinner, and he said, if you're ever in the area, his area, which would be 3,000 miles away from me, he said, come paint. So I'm saying this because I say take advantage of whatever opportunities come your way. He said that to a lot of people. Michael Klein, actually, and I have talked about this because he said the same thing. He says it to people all the time. And so few people kind of not take advantage, but that, so few people accept those opportunities. So I went home from that event, and I bought a plane ticket. I called Richard, and I said, "Hey, guess what? As it happens, I'm going to be in your area next month." And so I wasn't going to pass up that opportunity. So see what's available to you, and then don't treat those opportunities as invaluable by not doing something about them. There's something out there for you, and you just have to look for it and then take advantage of it when it comes.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Daniel, it was awesome to talk to you. You're an inspiration to me and a lot of my followers, I'm sure. So thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to do it. I hope some of it is interesting or helps or
It's going to be awesome.
entertaining or something.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.